Matt Pulley is a technology leader and entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in the tech industry, including as CTO at Home Chef, building platforms, leading teams, and seeing firsthand how digital tools are designed to capture attention and shape behavior. While leading the Screens in Schools group at Fairplay's Screen Time Action Network, he recognized that parents lacked the coordinated organizing tools available to corporations. This inspired him to found Four Norms, an online platform that gives parents and communities the tools to organize and shift norms around technology use from the ground up. Matt, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm excited. I think about this topic nonstop, so excited to talk about it.
That makes two of us. I want to start with something that I've asked many experts. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. So it's widely documented that tech industry leaders don't allow their own kids to use the products they develop and that they send their kids to tech-free schools like Waldorf. Most famously, Steve Jobs didn't allow his kids to use iPads or iPhones. So what do people in the tech industry know that others don't know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard this and seen it from the various whistleblowers, but I think we just kind of know what's behind the curtain. We kind of intimately know this, and we've been in the product room where we're talking about how do we pull our users back and get them engaged, whether it's a website or a mobile app or something else. And I think we just kind of know how these systems are built. In my journey, as a software engineer, we didn't know it was called persuasive design, but we were talking about this for a long time ago before that kind of became a term. And, typically using it for decent to good things, but at the time, when we kind of engineers and product designers started talking about this, maybe in the early days of, iPhones and App Store, we didn't quite think about what the nefarious kind of harms that this could happen. I think, folks like Tristan Harris at the Center for Humane Technology, they talk about this too with like infinite scroll and things like that. And also I would say, the tech entrepreneurs and those who kind of have worked in startups or founded companies, work in the venture capital ecosystem, we know how those conversations go at the board level, at the fundraising level, and sort of the mandates for growth. I mean, that's kind of the system. And we have been involved in those conversations and just kind of understand that the incentives typically, we know the incentive structure, but we also sort of know, like in our own personal lives, that those don't often match what we want as parents and as kids. And we can go into more details of what that means. But I think it's just kind of like that knowledge of what's behind the curtain, and it's just kind of that thinking that the system isn't set up for parenting, like
Yeah.
many systems. But
Yeah. You said something interesting, which I actually have said many times, which is that I don't think engineers set out to destroy humanity, right? With social media, like as somebody that's building platforms, your job is to make the user experience better, maybe remove friction, right? Things like that. I think about
right,
that all the
yes,
time because I'm old enough to remember when things like didn't work, right? So, but you mentioned infinite scroll. That was a function of, making the user experience better. And I can't remember who I read this in a book. The guy that developed infinite scroll, he talks about
yeah,
not
yeah,
realizing the impact that it had.
yeah,
So I think that's a really interesting point you brought up. And then this one I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I don't know if you agree with me. You and I are both entrepreneurial, right? And I think a lot of people in the tech industry are the same way. I wonder if also they just value creativity, they value problem solving. They see how, sometimes modern screen technology like iPads, things like that, actually can sort of strip that from kids. So I wonder if that's a part of it
yeah.
too. I don't know. What do you think about that part?
So just about how the that social media and phones and iPads can sort of strip that
Yeah,
from
I
kids.
don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons that I delay is
yeah,
that,
yeah,
I want my kids being bored. I want them tinkering. I want them coming up
yeah.
with ideas, right? So that's just my thesis, but I don't know if you agree
Right.
with it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you mentioned something a little bit ago about removing. We product designers thinking about removing friction, and like I've been in so many conversations where that was the conversation. How do we remove friction? And again, so first of all, I want to agree with you and say that almost all the engineers and technologists I've worked with, they're just some of the best people. We're certainly not, we're not all evil. It's just the system is not set up to prioritize like more humane design.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, we went really far into removing that friction, and I love just that word because it comes up now when we're thinking about youth and childhood advocacy, where we have done such a good job at that as product designers and engineers that there's almost no friction now in a kid's life,
Yeah.
especially if you believe that childhood is spent online and social networks are like kids physical social network is largely driven online, and I think that's kind of mostly true, but that means that it's their relationships and their friendships are and sometimes their relationships, their family, are driven through these apps that are frictionless. We know now through Jonathan Haidt's work and many others through Let Grow and those kind of initiatives that we actually have to in the offline world and online, whatever we're talking about, our kids need friction. And so it is a little bit of a outcome of decades of us engineers saying, how do we reduce friction so that we can so they can buy that next thing. But I think the snowball got rolling, and we started building more things for kids. And I know we're going to talk about EdTech and things like that, but all those platforms are built to sort of like remove friction,
Yeah.
which is not what proper development is about. And that's not something that idea that I just said is not something new that we've discovered in the last 5 years. This is like decades, if not 100 years in the knowledge in terms of childhood and psychology, that hey, kids need friction. They need to struggle and have the trial and error. So yeah, that's an unfortunate outcome of a couple decades of design.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. This is a big theme that we talk about too, that kids need to be a little bit uncomfortable. They need to struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
They need to put in effort. They need all these things to learn and to grow. And you can ask any childhood development expert or
Right.
a
Right.
psychologist or anybody, they will tell you that these things are super important. And I think that's what you're saying. And in a way, being online for young people might feel better than real life, right? Because there's
Mhm.
nobody really, it's just easy, right? Especially like AI companions, which we don't need to get
Yeah.
into, right? Like
Right.
they're not going to push back on you. They're not going to tell you what they really think, or they can't
Yep.
think. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, in a way, it's because that friction's removed.
Yeah.
I know it's easier, maybe possibly better than real life in a lot of ways. And that's the
It,
Jonathan Haidt piece, right? Where we know we
yeah.
need to be in the real world as mammals, as humans. Like that is how we need to develop social relationships. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot there, but definitely I think there's a connection for sure.
Yeah. I think the feeling is that it's better now, right now, it's better in the short term,
Yes,
but we don't take that long-term approach, whether it's, it's harder for kids to take that long-term approach themselves, which is why they need great adults in their lives and parents. But I think when I speak with parents, one of the things I want to convey is taking that long-term view of, yeah, sure, it's easy right now to just like, give them a device or whatever. But the long term really matters, and long-term view.
for sure. Okay, I'd love to ask you about four norms.
Mm.
So, can you tell us what's the idea behind four norms and how does it work to help parents organize around technology and kids in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. I got to spend about a year and a half working as the chair of the Screens in Schools group at the Screen Time Action Network, and worked with other groups here in Chicago and just other advocacy groups. And a theme that I kept seeing is that there are these great and courageous parents raising their hand and say, I want to make change in my community. What do I do? And that could be starting a play club. It could be asking my school for phone free or anything in between. I saw like emails and chat groups, and these messages kept getting crossed, and awesome things were shared, but then they kind of got lost in the shuffle.
Hmm.
And then kind of, I'm a systems builder by heart. So I just kind of kept thinking through like, how can I like help these parents who I think are, again, like very courageous. They're raising their hand. That's a very hard thing to do. And that was the genesis of it. And then I would say, Dr. Haidt's book came out, and the antidote that he and many other people is to take collective action, link arms. But okay, great. How do you do that? And I think that's the question a lot of parents say. So we want to answer that question for them. And so we started by, just creating a suite of tools to say, hey, we know this work this is a national problem that requires a local solution, and you're the champion of your local solution. This is something you're doing in real life, IRL, you're meeting, having coffee chats, meeting with your school board, whatever it might be. We just want to create something that you can get more people involved and organize around this without adding too much to your plate, because most of these people are volunteers. They're doing this in the spare time that they don't have because we're parents
Yeah.
and we're all tired
Yeah.
and busy. So I wanted to make it as easy as possible. So we say, like, we want to make collective action accessible to everyone. What we learned when we started building was that we have this opportunity to add social proof. So that means it's not just you taking action. Guess what? There are these group over here and group over here, and it's all across the country. So if you look on our website and our network, we have groups all across the country. And we also have an event listing. So events, whether from coffee chats to community calls, are happening. There's probably 40 or 50 events on our event listing right now. What we hope to do, other than help individual parent groups take action, is show that social proof to say you're not alone. This is happening across the country. And when you want to organize a group of parents, this is something that's been done before, and you can use our platform to do that, and you can see what works in other communities. And then the last thing I will say is what I'm most excited about is, along the way, we found what I think are the secret champions of this movement. And that is, we call them, they're coalition builders. But these are those same parents who raised their hand in their own community, but they said, what if I didn't do this just in my community, but what if we got our neighboring towns to do this? Or
Yeah.
what if we started a statewide coalition and said all the groups in the state of X can get together and let's talk to each other and figure this out? So we sort of zeroed in, and I think they're creating this sort of like middle layer of the movement. There's a bunch of great organizations who are fighting for policy change at the state and national level, and of course these grassroots like parent groups. But I'm really excited about these kind of movement coordinators that are coordinating these groups across states and across and sort of creating a patchwork that across the nation. So those people, I think, are real heroes. We're really excited about them. And so what we want, we created a really robust set of tools for them to coordinate action across multiple groups, multiple chapters. And in doing that, we want to sort of make them less isolated, but connect them. And when we connect all of those great sort of regional statewide coalitions, then you can start to see that's a movement. And that's what we're really excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I'll just tell you from my personal experience, because I did join the local chapter in my area. It's just so much easier to navigate, connecting people together, right? My world as a mom includes a bunch of group texts, a bunch of WhatsApp groups. It is a
Yeah,
pain.
right.
And I'm not talking about collective action necessarily, but teams, anything that involves groups of parents. And first of all, it's annoying. But second of all, like you said, it's just not robust enough, right? You can maybe send messages back and forth, but if you tune out for a day, you've got 50 things you have to go back and read, and you're trying to reorient yourself.
Yeah.
So your platform kind of streamlines and organizes that, and ironically removes the friction from that, right? So that's good. And the other thing I wanted to stress is, to me, the way I look at it, and I think you might look at it similarly, there's so much great work being done by orgs like Wait Till 8th, for example, which, to clarify for people that don't know, means waiting on the smartphone till end of 8th grade. But it stops there, right? So, and they're a great org. That is what they do. The one thing, they do it really well. But this kind of takes it one step further and allows those parents to now organize for specific things, like you mentioned a couple of them, whether it's phone free schools or delaying smartphones or whatever it is. And do you want to tell people the name Four Norms, what that comes from?
Yeah, of course. So it was if you've read The Anxious Generation, it is very much inspired by that. There are four foundational norms that he quotes in there, and that's you've already mentioned some of them: delay the smartphone, delay social media, phone free schools, and then more independence and free
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Um, and there's more thinking around like EdTech and AI, that kind of things, but they all kind of bucket into these kind of like new norm. And what I was really inspired by, I think those words are important to put down on paper, and it really changed the national conversation. But what the most inspiring thing for me was when he said, we don't have to, guess what? We don't have to wait for regulation, which is likely not coming, but you can change the norms in your local community. our mantra at Four Norms is when the system is too slow to change, communities can. And that is really powerful to me because as a parent with kids in school who pays attention to regulation on the national level, I'm just kind of like, can we pass a law? Can we pass codes? Can we pass anything related to this? That feels so distant and it feels so like hard.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I don't I can impact that. I mean, I can talk to my legislators, that kind of thing today and tomorrow. I can definitely impact my friends, the parents of my daughter's schoolmates, my school and my community. And that felt really empowering that we have the ability and just the concept of like banding together and say, what if we all delayed? That makes your job easier and that makes my job easier as a parent. And that's something that we can do. Now it's hard. And that's what our platform is trying to do is make it less hard. And when I say it's hard, I mean, we're humans. It's really hard to go up to even your friends and say, hey, I feel kind of like weird about this. Do you feel,
Yeah.
when it comes to like phones, but those conversations are now happening and much more normalized. But that piece, that's why I named the platform that, just because the most empowering thing to me is that we can change our norms and we can start tomorrow, today.
Yeah, you're so right that this is such a highly community driven subject. I work with a lot of schools. I work with a lot of families, and sometimes I'll go into a community where most of the kids have phones. Let's just do phones. Most of them have 'em by fourth grade, right? I'll go into another community where they're like in eighth grade, middle school, and nobody has them, right? And it's so interesting. And this is just like maybe in the LA area, but it is a contagious thing. And you know how this works. One kid gets it. Then, another parent says, oh, so and so has it. Then soon it becomes, well, everybody has it but me. That's generally not true, by the way, but this is what kids say. So
Yep.
it spreads. And I mean, virus sounds a little bit negative, but it is a little bit like a virus in that way. So this is where the community approach really matters and makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the way
Right.
it works, is there's so much strength in that. So yeah, I just wanted to throw
Yeah,
that
I
in.
mean, I think that the community approach is so important because I'm sure that the kids do feel that way. I'm the only one, but there are also like these other pressures that make them feel that way. It's not just their friends, which I think is a big one, but schools make their announcements on Instagram. They
I
they make their
know.
sports schedules. So like I think that I think educate. I am not an educator, but educators. I think schools have always known this, but they have this persuasiveness in the community, and that's why the phone free school, like a bell to bell ban at the school level, is so important. For the academic outcomes in the school, but it also makes the parents' lives easier
That's
in
right.
that community because now they can say, "Hey, this school is you don't need this at school, so you don't need it at home." Fifth
Right.
grader or sixth
Yeah.
grader,
It's the
so
leadership.
that
Yeah.
really helps the whole community. It helps make parents' jobs easier.
Yeah, and I do a lot of professional development too, and I try to get this point across, which is that parents are looking for the schools to provide that leadership. And I just want to say too, it's also not the school's fault. They shouldn't have to go up against big tech,
Of
but
course,
they
I
have a
know.
better
Yeah,
chance at it than an individual parent, right? But when they show the leadership, then like you said, it empowers the parents to then back that up, right? It's so hard to go at this alone. And something like a phone free school, for example, it's signaling that that they don't endorse this, right? In a way, it's subtle, but it really, really matters. And last point, and then we'll move on. But I spoke to a Swedish journalist, Linda McGurk. I don't know if you know her work, but we talked a lot about Sweden's policies. And so they went all in on tech. Then now they're stripping it away. And she said one of the most interesting things they've seen happen is now that Sweden's public health department has put out guidelines for parents, it gives them like the scaffolding and the support that they need to now say to their kids, this is what the country recommends, right? And
hmm
obviously that's much more significant to get policy on a national level. And to your point, I don't see that happening here anytime soon, but schools can be a
hmm
small piece of that, right? So I just want to
that's
throw
right.
in that last bit of point is that parents need help. You cannot go at this
Yeah.
alone.
It's
Yeah.
Look, we're in an unfair system. It's unfair to parents that we have to have these conversations. It's unfair to schools and school leaders. I mean, that's what we came up against as when I was chair of the Screen Time Action Network, and they still are. This is an unfair system, for all of us, and that's why it's going to take all of us to take collective action, take action together.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So I wanted to ask you, pivoting a little bit, about this idea, and it comes up all the time in my parent eds, of using modern screen technology as like a technical school skill. So one of the most common areas of pushback in those parent eds is that kids need to be exposed to tech early so that they're prepared for the digital world. So, what would you say to parents that are concerned about the development of technical skills specifically?
Yeah, I this one bothers me a lot. I think this is just the marketing message. You know, these are some of the most wealthiest companies in the history of the world that are putting out this marketing message. I do this, otherwise your kids will be left behind. And of course, parents respond to that because nobody wants our kids to be left behind. But and we can get into kind of how I learned this, but I like to say that core EQ skills are technical skills. So
Yeah.
just kind of in my industry, we've always kind of we've always prioritized technical skills. Can you design? Can you code? All these kind of things. And what we've learned over the past, I don't know, it's too recent, like decade maybe, that these core EQ skills, sort of as it became easier to learn to code and to learn, and kids kind of grew up, designing, coding online,
Hmm.
that now it's those core EQ skills that differentiate. And so you hear this from a lot of folks, whether it's the, organizations like Let Grow, like get out independence and develop autonomy. But what I would say is the skills of developing agency and autonomy and independence, resiliency, self-regulation.
Yeah.
Those are the skills that are hireable, I would say.
Yeah.
And then my partner at Deborah at Four Norms and some other projects we've worked on here in Chicago, kind of taught me the concept of an offline identity. And so she runs a nonprofit here in Chicago with after school programs focused on social emotional learning. Basically, as kids, if you don't develop a strong and grounded offline identity, you'll get lost in the online world. And so for parents, we're thinking about how do we help our kids develop that strong offline identity before we introduce them to phones and social media, whether your rule is 14, 18, whatever. We want to make sure that our kids are, have that strong offline identity. They've developed the autonomy and agency. We don't know, these are sort of those core skills. We don't know what the future is going to bring in terms of like how far AI will go or whatever technology is next. My oldest daughter's in first grade, so there's a long way to go. I don't know what sort of jobs will be available when she's in the workforce and what kind
Yeah.
of technology they'll be working for. But the way I think about the skills that I want her to have are the skills that are true, have always been true when we go back through history and in terms of childhood development, and what I believe will be true in the future. And that is sort of those self-regulation, emotional skills. When I was building, my first teams, I was, becoming a father, and like most new parents, I was reading the baby books and the baby brain books, and then it occurred, and I was kind of building and hiring a lot of people at the same time, and I had this kind of epiphany that all these brain books, they talk about what a child needs to develop. And this epiphany was like, oh my gosh, like adults need that too. Like we're talking about creating a team atmosphere. How do you create psychological safety and put people in position to do their best work? And I think about that too, in terms of raising my daughters, the impact of technology on kids. We talked about friction earlier, but are these, whether it's phones, social media, chatbots, any of those, are they removing those skills or flattening those skills such that they can't continue to develop them? And that's going to matter in terms of achievement, whether that's going to come out in college. If they go to college, it's going to come out in the workforce. And so from the parent perspective, I think about, what are those core skills that will be true no matter what, no matter where the technology goes? And to bring it back to your original question on technical hiring, one of the biggest things I learned when I was building my teams was that, traditionally in tech, we've always prioritized the technical skill. We've had, and most of the interview process starts with sort of a coding challenge or a coding puzzle. You may have seen this in like pop culture or read about it, but if you're not in tech, basically the first thing you do is do a coding challenge. And
Hmm.
then if you pass along that, then you kind of get interviewed for the company. When I was building my teams, I was like, man, that can't be it. So some of these people are the best coders I've ever seen. and they're frankly terrible teammates. They're terrible for my company. What does that look like? And over the course of a couple of years building, it finally occurred to me. So that these EQ skills matter so much more. So we reversed our interview process to focus only on the EQ. So that may seem kind of obvious, but in the technical world, 10, 15 years ago, that was not obvious because all we
Yeah,
cared about was the technical skills. So
sure.
when we started doing that, we started passing through all these people that were high EQ. They they could really talk through. They were great teammates. And we developed this saying that like we can always teach you to code better, but it's almost impossible for us to teach you better regulation, better social and self-awareness for being in a team, being in a company, critical thinking. And so when we reversed our process to focus on that, what ended up happening is we were able to make these great hires. They weren't always like the top coders, but they quickly became top coders within a year working with us because they had these foundational skills that we could build on. The hard part was not teaching them how to code. The hard part was, can you, use your technical skills to build value for our team, to build, frankly, when we're building a startup, to build value for our company so that we can get the next round of funding, whatever, become profitable, whatever it might be. And so that was my learning. And fast forward, I had no idea at the time. I started writing about this. Like, I think we're getting it wrong, in technical side. But fast forward to now, as I start to work in kids and youth and tech, those things connect for me. This is the same concept. If our kids, yes, they're in a digital world, they're going to grow up and enter this digital world. But if they don't have those skills that we've already identified as being leaders, then they won't be able to put those skills to use. So that was a little bit of my journey and the learnings along the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a lot to say about this. I'll just piggyback on a couple things you said, which I think are really important. One of them is you talked about your daughter's age and how like you have no idea what the landscape's going to look like. I would just add to that, like, we don't know what the landscape's going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to be
Right.
changing so quickly
Yeah.
that I mean, my current worry is I just wonder if schools are adapting quick enough to put out the type of graduates that we're going to actually need for the future.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm just want to put that out there in the context of AI and how quickly nobody knows. Like, even the thought leaders of AI cannot tell you what the world is going to look like in just
Yeah.
5 years, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's really important to stress. I couldn't agree with you more. So about the tech skills being able to be taught or picked up easier than those other skills. So you and I've had this conversation, but I've had my branding marketing ad agency since 2005, so that's a long time, and I've been hiring people
Hmm.
a long time. And our process in 2005, it looks nothing like our process now. What we
Hmm.
worked on then looks nothing like it works on what it looks like now. So being adaptable, flexible, evolution, I think is even more important. And when I would
Yeah.
hire people, because we would typically hire young people, that was just, we were always a small business. So that's typically kind of where we would pull from. I would actually prefer to hire somebody that was super sharp and
Hmm.
adaptable and a learn it all, not a know it all, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
didn't have any skills than somebody that came with a bunch of skills and baggage but couldn't figure things out. So I would always
Yeah.
look for the candidates where I got, and we had methods for doing this that were, I knew that they could sort of figure things out, right? Because our process as an agency was not like any other process of any other agency. So it didn't matter, and I had to
Right.
teach them
Right.
everything anyway. So I looked more for people that could pick things up quickly. And then yes, all the skills you mentioned, leadership, being able to have good social relationships was super important. Just all those soft skills you talked about. I couldn't agree with you more. So yeah, I just wanted to add those couple things to that because I did also, and I think you and I talked about this privately, but I shared with you that I did see a decline in just competency. And I hate to
Hmm.
say this as like a overall rule because there's amazing young people at, no matter what, at any time in history. But if I had to pull from 100, people, the percentage of candidates that had these skills went down over time between 2005 to, last year. So there is something there, and it correlates with all the other data we've seen. in,
Yeah.
the rise of modern screen technologies. So those are
Yeah.
the things I wanted to add on. I don't know if you wanted to take my bait there and add on to that.
Well, I will a little bit. I think that as sad as this is, it kind of creates an opportunity for parents. So there's a great author, Cal Newport, who wrote a book called Deep Work and some other books, but he wrote a book in 2017 called Deep Work. This is kind of before we started talking about it being tech related, but he basically said the concept of deep work and developing a deep life is kind of more rare these days. It's really what you were talking about, this percentage of young people out of a 100 applicants,
Mhm.
becoming less and less. And what he said was, those of you who can develop a deep life will have an advantage in the coming years because you will stand above the rest. And it's almost a little bit of a sad thing because it's not people rising above. It's sort of like the bar's lowering so much that if But I really love that because I mean, as again, as sad as it is, I think that for my daughters, like if we can help them develop this deep life, unfortunately, there's a lot of shallowness out there. They will actually stand above the rest in terms of college admissions, in terms of jobs. I really believe that, and I think that's an opportunity for sort of a mindset for parents to take on this, and especially when they're thinking about phones and tech and what impact that's going to have on their lives. And
I
I wanted to make sure to get this one quote in there because I love this saying. But all this we're talking about, I like to say that's the difference between, especially on the technical side. But this is the difference between those who will create the future and those who will merely consume it.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh my gosh, that's a good one. But just really quick, I don't know if you saw the article. I think it was Palantir. It was one of those companies that are now recruiting kids straight out of high school. Did you see this? And I
No.
think it's connected to a lot of the things that we're talking about.
Hmm.
So anyway, interesting. Okay, can we pivot a little bit to EdTech? We kind of
Yeah.
touched on it for a second earlier, but we know EdTech is a huge business. So according to my research, in 2023, I don't have the latest numbers. It was a 231 billion market size. I'm sure it's much higher now. Funding tripled in 2020 due to the pandemic. So I always bring that up because I think it's really important to put that into context, that was sort of what propelled it. So what is your take on the rapid rise of ed tech specifically, and now the use of AI in schools?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an educator and I don't know the full history, but from my take, it certainly seems like it was accelerated in the pandemic. Some of the, initially for required reasons when schools were shut down. But the thing that I think about is that we never took a second to retrospect that and see if we needed to pull back afterwards. So these industries just sort of took off with it. But my overall take and my fear for like, at least my own kids is that our this has put our kids in the position of being the guinea pigs in this grand experiment of ed tech. So these platforms, these apps are largely unregulated and
Yeah.
they are largely not independently researched. So I am all for, again, as a technologist by myself, all for sort of using technology to help the classroom, help school, help educators. But if it's not going to be in a independently vetted way, we're all just believing the marketing, and the marketing we know is very like they have the money to put out whatever sort of marketing. That was true before AI entered the chats, but the and now I think it's doubly true. I mean, these organizations are even less regulated, if that was even possible,
Yeah.
because there's none, and then there's an active movement to sort of prohibit states from you know regulating while there's no national regulation. So my fear in all this is that these companies are unregulated. Their business models. So my friend and colleague from the Screen Time Action Network, Andy Lydell, do you know who that is? They
I don't,
run
but I know. Yeah.
they run the EdTech Law Center,
Okay.
and so and he is adamant. They work on behalf of parents and schools to kind of go after big tech, and he will say, look, it's the business model. We have to somehow get to the business model, and that's what that is. And I agree with that. The business model, the incentives, the lack of regulation, it all sort of adds up to, again, what I fear is just sort of a big test of a generation of kids. And so far we are sort of failing that test. I would say sort of like as a society failing in that generation because that test is ongoing.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at all the charts for academics, if they were going up, up, up alongside technology, I don't think we'd be
Right,
having
right.
this conversation, but that's
Yeah,
not what's happening. They're going
yeah.
down, down, down as same with mental health and everything else. So it's not working, first of all. I, again, have a lot of things to say about this, but just from the parent point of view, because I do the parent eds primarily for
Hmm.
dopamine. So I've spoken to thousands of parents at this point. I would say the top three, this is in the top three complaints that they give me every time is the Chromebook that is sent home.
Yeah,
So it becomes the parent's problem, right? To
yeah,
regulate. You
yeah.
cannot fully lock them down. I don't care what type of software you have. I have seen both sides of
Hmm.
it. My son's in seventh grade, so we were required to get him a device at his previous school. I spent 6 hours locking it down. It was a nightmare. I did do a MacBook because I'm most familiar with Apple and all that,
Hmm.
but it was just a game of whack-a-mole. And of course, nobody else locked him down. It
Yeah,
was like social
right.
media, video games, everything was just completely Wild West rampant during the school day. And now I'm on the other side as current school does have school issued, which I think is probably a better practice because at least everyone's on the same playing field. And, I think apps like, or platforms like Go Guardian do work, obviously. But even then, like he's finding free video game sites and things that
Yeah,
aren't
right.
blocked. And they're allowing
Yeah,
YouTube, right? I mean, they block
yeah,
certain
right.
things, but it's just it's impossible. And then not to mention they're so smart. They can
Yeah,
collaborate in
for
other
sure.
ways with like Google Docs or whatever, they're going to get
Yeah,
around it. So parents just complain, complain, complain about that. But then also the second piece of it is sleep. They all say, I know we need to turn it off 1 or 2 hours before bedtime, but we can't. We have activities, like we have to be doing homework at night. And it's just a huge burden on parents. So that is like the school
yeah.
issue device side. So yeah, did you have anything to add to
Yeah,
that part of it?
again, society is not set up for parenting at its best. You know, it's
Yes.
like here's a device that they won't be able to get off of, and make sure your kids get a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they're impossible to lock down. There are categories of requests that you can make to the school. You can of course ask to remove one-to-one devices, especially for earlier K through 3, K through 5. But if you have them, you can request, can we request no homework, take home homework, so that there's not this excuse. And there are things in between. I want to point out, because I hear this a lot, that I put all the parental controls, I did the thing,
Yeah.
and my kids still get around it. Because of course I do. But here's kind of a fundamental thing, which goes back to one of my last points, is they will get around them. That's just kind of the way teenagers have always been this way, whether back in the analog days, whatever. That's teenagers. But a thing for parents to know is that on that same note, guess what would happen? So one of the antidotes to this is, at least your own personal. This is not, sorry, this is kind of going away from school issue devices for a second, but delay, 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 delay. Whether it's phones, their own. So if you delay and you're scared that your kids will be left behind, guess what? Your teenagers will always be able to do, and this is true throughout history. They can pick up technology faster than any parent can. And so that will be true when they're 12 versus 16, 18. And so for the same reason that kids are sort of breaking through the controls on Chromebooks and phones, it's the same skill. So delaying will not hurt their chances of understanding this new technology, is what I'm saying. Because
Totally.
they will be able to pick it up. This has been true over generations and generations. So I just that reminded me of that point. But anyway, we can go back
Yeah.
to school
No,
issues.
no,
But
no. I mean, I always say this stuff is so easy a baby can operate it. And actually, somebody
yeah,
told me recently, like chimpanzees are operating iPads. So that argument just does not resonate. But you brought up something too, which is, I say this all the time, the less you give, the less you have to manage, right? And I think it becomes, some parents feel it's unfair when they don't have a choice, right? When the school gives it.
yeah,
But I do agree with you. And I've done this myself. You have to kind of sometimes make fun of yourself, which is what I did. Like I'd call myself the
hmm,
phone Karen or the tech Karen because I was one that I'd push back and I'd be like, nope, I'm not, my kindergartner is not
yeah,
doing IXL. Sorry, you can send
yeah,
paper if you want. And I've said this to other parents and I've interviewed a lot of people who say like public schools, private schools, most teachers will work with you and most teachers actually don't like it either. It's
yeah.
just
That's true.
we've created. And then just like two more quick things. I don't know if you know who Ash Brandon is. They were one of my recent interviews. The platform or the Instagram's The Gamer Educator. But anyway, innovative public school teacher, author, kind of has a different take on it. Tech a little bit and video games specifically, but we talked about EdTech a lot. And they brought up an interesting point, which is kind of what I said earlier in my question, which is that schools invested so much in technology during the pandemic that they kind of can't go back. And what we mean by that is it costs millions and then billions, I guess, on a national level. If we said, let's just go back to textbooks, like it's kind of, it's tricky, right? Because the infrastructure is there. And so I think schools feel trapped as well. And then the other thing we talked about in that was often, and you talked about this earlier, about these ed tech companies being unregulated. Often the companies that are running the tests are the ones that are selling the test preps and the AI tutors and things like that. Yeah. So I just tell educators to be critical thinkers about what they bring in, just as much as I would tell parents to be critical thinkers about what they bring into their families. So it's hard.
It is. And if you happen to be able to set up kind of a tech council that's teachers, parents, students within your school to help, or if you're part of an education system that is vetting these, we need to set up better vetting tech systems, but follow the money is kind of where it goes. Follow the money on these. So that's not super easy to do, especially when you have hundreds of decisions to make. But as a principal, if you can at all, ask your school, or if you're on these committees, to follow the money from these vendors to see where they get their funding or where they get their research. Slash, efficacy.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Well, I'm sure this issue will be evolving even more quickly with all the AI stuff coming. It's crazy. But Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really wanted to dive into the tech side of this issue with somebody that gets it, that was on the inside. So thank you so much for doing that, because I think it's so important for parents to understand, because everybody wants their kid to succeed. People are really looking for when they hire kids, and what you and I and many others, the CEO of Google, the CEO of LinkedIn, the CEO of Microsoft, they've all said the same thing you said about the soft skills being the most important in the next few years as AI evolves. So thank you for being able to speak to all that with authority. And I'm a fan of 4 norms. I love what you've done to help parents organize. I think your message is so true that the system is not set up to make parenting easy. But I think what you've done is hopefully alleviated a little bit of that and allowed. There's so many great parents that want to step up and help. You've allowed them, you've given them a tool to be able to do that. So thanks for everything you do. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Annika. I loved being on. And our mission is to make it easy for parents to do. But if nothing else, and for the folks listening, especially parents, we want to provide that social proof that this is happening across the country. So if you're feeling alone in your community, know that just isn't the case. It is happening across the country.
So true. Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Annika.